I have to write. And so writing to me is, you mentioned cathartic, it's essential. And it takes me, it's when I feel flow, when I feel like if this is the way life is, I could do this forever, because you really transform yourself into a different world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Author Spotlight brought to you by Apex Media Global. I'm your host, Monica, and I'm excited to be sitting down today with Professor Sue C. or Susan M. Christensen. Susan just has a way of, storytelling. It's just so full of heart and imagination. In her book, Auggie the Dragon, we meet a lovable dragon through the eyes of a curious girl. And in her book, Core-Uption, we go dive into the deepest core of the earth and meet some challenges in humorous ways. And then there's her collection of poetry, Precious Gems, that resonates with all types of readers. And I can't wait to pick her brain and be inspired by her work process. So, welcome to the show, Susan.
Well, thank you so much, Monica. It's great to be here.
Thank you for being here. So, I mentioned Auggie the Dragon, and I was reading through, the synopsis of the book and was trying to, read through the book as well. And if I'm not mistaken, you mentioned that it is inspired by a conversation you had with a little girl. Can
Yeah.
you tell me more about that?
Yes, it was my granddaughter Sierra, who's now in her 20s, but she was 3 at the time. Yeah,
Oh,
and she came over to my house, and at the time I didn't have television because as a writer, I write. So it was quiet in the house and the refrigerator went on. And she goes, Grandma, what's that? And I said, Oh, that's just a refrigerator. Well, then it was an older little cottage kind of apartment, and the heater, it sounded like someone was dragging 100-pound bag of potatoes across the roof, and then it would go and make this sound. And she goes, Grandma, what is that? And her eyes were huge. And I said, That's the dragon that lives on Grandma Sue's roof. And she looked afraid, and so I told her, I said, it's okay, it's okay. He loves Grandma and he keeps Grandma safe and warm. And I started telling her about this dragon, and so I asked her, I said, what do you think he looks like? And she said, he's purple with pink flower tattoos, because her parents both have tattoos. So he was purple with pink flower tattoos, and I asked her what his name was, and she said he's Auggie the Dragon, and he lives on Grandma Sue's roof. And so that's the full title of the book, Auggie the Dragon Who Lives on Grandma Sue's Roof. And so it it just blossomed from that moment of inspiration, um, and it just continued on, and my grandkids have had a good time with it over the years. And before it was a book, I would read it to them from the computer, and I was amazed that without illustrations, without any prompting, they got the story even at 5 and 6 years old. So I had my own little focus group.
that's so wonderful. Just like from a conversation you had with your granddaughter, and it's just
Yes.
encapsulated, and just a lot of grandmothers are going to read that story to their grandchildren and just going to have a bonding time. That's beautiful.
Well, and that was my idea of saying it through Sierra's voice. I didn't do it intentionally, but now that I did it, I was glad, because it was like the granddaughter taking a fluid interest, and Grandma's life is interesting, and to bring that bond where and bridge those generational gaps, and to know Grandma's just a girl that grew up, but she's still fun and has imagination, and um enjoys life. And to me, the kids are inspiration. Kids and my students, yeah.
That's so unique and beautiful. And in the book, is it from the perspective of Sierra?
Sierra's telling the story of the time that this dragon landed on Grandma Sue's roof, and the heater had gone out. And so they were freezing, and Grandma Sue called the heater company, and they said, we can't get to it. And then they woke up the next morning, it was warm. And so they called to thank the heating company, and they said, we didn't do anything. And that's when they discovered the dragon sleeping on the roof. And then the adventures begin.
That's crazy. So when you were writing that book, were you putting yourself in Sierra's shoes or were you just
Yeah,
giving her a
that
voice?
is the thing. When you are writing, you always try to get into the character. And what would the character do in this situation? What would she say? And what would and there is a part in the book where Grandma Sue and her friend Fairy Dust, who that is my nickname for my best friend, is Fairy Dust. They have a flat tire, and so they say words that little girls can't say. And so Sierra says that she goes, "Oops, I can't say what they just said." So I feel telling it from her point of view gives it such a fresh, innocent perspective.
Do you think that it's harder to tell a story from the perspective of a little girl, or is it harder to tell it from, an adult perspective?
I think an adult perspective, because there's such a vast array of different reactions an adult might have, and adult situations can be harder to process or present in a way that the reader's going to totally grasp it. And I think I just have fun from the children's perspective, because then I get to go be a little girl again and kind of see the world the way it used to look to me. And it's just the way it turns out in the story.
I imagine it must be like such a cathartic experience to connect with your inner child and
Yes.
be imaginative and as creative as you can be.
Yes, and it's actually interesting because um there is it's called the midnight disease, and it's the need to write to maintain your balance. That there are people, and I've been told I'm one of them, that in order to contain my emotional balance, I have to write. And so writing to me, is you mentioned cathartic, it's essential. And it's when I feel flow, when I feel like if this is the way life is, I could do this forever, because you really transform yourself into a different world, and you have control over the directions it's going to go, and responsibility. But I just find when I'm writing, I'm transferred. I'm just transported into another realm. I was just going to say that I never set out to be a writer, but from the moment I learned to write at 7, to learn to really write a story, I've been writing. I was the kid that spent the afternoon in the bedroom writing stories and just listening to stories and making up stories. And so I've always written. And it's funny because I always carried a book, uh, to write, a journal, a pen, and a writing pad, and then a book to read, and my crocheting whenever we would go somewhere with my kids. And one day we were going to go to the Getty. My daughter was grown, and I got in the car and I didn't have my bag. And she asked me, she goes, "Where's your bag, Mom?" And I said, "Oh no, I'm not. I'm going to give you my full attention. I'm not going to be distracted with anything." And she goes, "No, Mom, go get the bag." So it was just part of my life that they knew that I wrote and crocheted and did these things. And it's just something that brings me so much joy. And just it's a part of who I am, is the only way I can describe it.
You're so lucky to have realize what you've always wanted to do at the age of 7. And I think you're also very lucky to have been surrounded by people that really understand your creative process and don't,
Yeah.
take that away from you. But I think like writing and crocheting also helps you stay in the moment. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
stay in the moment in a different world, but regardless, you're staying in the moment.
In the moment, yes.
Right?
For
Uh, Speaking of different worlds, I want to talk about your book Core-Uption and the
Okay.
creatures that you've created, such as Potahs. Can you
The
tell me
Potahs,
about the creative process
yes.
behind that and what made you think of that?
How that came to be. I tell people if you want to know what goes on in here, read my writing because I can entertain myself anywhere. The Potahs was a funny. I was talking to a friend, and he was an aspiring writer, and he wanted to write a story about vegetables that became animated and wanted revenge on all the kids that didn't want to eat their vegetables. And I couldn't wrap my head around it. I was like, you go, guy. But it gave me the idea of I don't know, it just the potas came and I thought, what would they look like? Well, potatoes, we call them potato eyes, the little roots. So I thought they could have eyes, and at the end of the eyes, that way they could look around corners and see different things, and they would look like the different kinds of potatoes. There would be small ones and russets and all the different. And then it's just as I start writing, it all starts coming together. I don't sit down with a plan. I just feel like it's time to write, and it just comes. And that was actually written over a 6-week period when I was staying with my son and his family, and the house was full of kids, and you'd have never thought I'd have got writing done, but I sat in their living room with everything going on around me writing Core-Uption, and it was fun. And Joshi is actually my best friend, Fairy Dust. It's her son is Joshi, who I built the character around. So he's excited about the book too. And it's just fun for all these connections to so many people can have a piece of this.
It's really fascinating. You really do stay in the moment by writing. I mean, being surrounded by a
Yes.
lot of, children, but still having that calm and peace and be spontaneous with
Hmm.
your creative writing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I think if kids pick up your books, I think they would start eating their vegetables, I would assume.
Okay. They probably will start um striking on about eating potatoes, so they'll be like, I'm not eating that potato chip, that's a potah.
Right? They're gonna come alive in my mouth.
Well, maybe they'll get healthy. Maybe they'll eat apple wedges instead of French fries. The moms can say, "You don't want to eat a potah, do you?"
It's gonna be like a little inside joke. That's so cute.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so you did Auggie the Dragon, and then you did the story about the Potahs,
Uh-huh.
Core-Uption, and
Yes.
then now you have your collection of poetry, which is Precious Gems. What
Yes.
made you step into the poetry world and write poetry?
That goes back to when I was in middle school. We moved and there were a lot of changes, and I didn't feel like I fit in. So I would go to the library during lunchtime and I copied song lyrics out of books and different poems that I liked. I had a whole book of just copied poems that I wrote that I didn't write. I copied out while I was eating lunch at the library. I would have, and so I would read the song lyrics, um and then I went through some times, and I started writing about them. And I think by me writing out all those lyrics that it actually taught my brain something because I just started writing poetry. And Precious Gems is just they're poems that I've written throughout the years. And they there's one why I write, and one of the lines in it is um that I write because without this I as me cease to be. So I even had a doctor one time that I was having stomach problems, and I went to the doctor for an exam, and he touched he goes, "I've never felt your stomach so relaxed. What are you doing different? You have to keep doing what you're doing." And I told him, I said I was up all night, and I had toddlers, an infant and a toddler, and I was up all night writing. So I should have been exhausted, but I was so energetic. And I told him, I said, I stayed up writing poetry last night. And he said, "Do you have any with you?" And I had my book in my bag. So I read him one of my the poem Why I Write, and he told me to continue writing, and he gave me a photograph of a rose, and he had me handwrite that poem on the rose, and he hung it in his office in Anaheim Hills. So
Wow.
that touched me. And then throughout my college experience, I had several professors tell me my work was publishable, and to encourage, I had a communications class that I read the snow poem to, and the instructor wanted to know where I got the poem, and I was kind of like, I wrote it. And he told me it was publishable. That and probably one of the most touching times was there was a poetry reading at the college. I went back to school as an adult, so I was older than the rest of the kids. And I felt one thing I felt was I feel like my poetry is very relatable in the sense of I the message is pretty clear. It's not a lot of abstract. And so I felt like I was Norman Rockwell in a room full of Picassos. I felt like, but that's okay. Everybody has different, things, and beautiful things these young people were writing. And so I got up, and my oldest son had given me some times, and so I read some of the poetry I'd written about him. And it was funny because all of a sudden, about half the students left, and then they came back, and they're like, "Where'd you go?" And you know what they told me? They said that after I read my poetry, they all went to call their mothers.
Oh,
Because they didn't realize how much what they were doing was impacting their mothers. So that really, it gives me chills to know that it motivated those kids to call their moms.
I'm getting
So
the chills. I'm getting the chills myself. I mean, from that story you were saying that when you were in the doctor's office, I think it's a lesson, even though it's cliche, that art really heals. Like, no matter how
it does
exhausted,
heal. Hmm.
right? No matter how
It is.
exhausted you are, you can still find peace
It's
in
part of
just,
who we are. Yeah.
mm, yeah, you
That
just connect with
time.
your inner self. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really beautiful, and you're just really inspired by your family or your friends'
Yeah.
sons.
Friends and family, and yes.
That's so wholesome. And about your book, Precious Gems, you end the book with a chapter, Fear the Beasts No More. Am I correct? And
Yes.
that title really struck me, and it gave me a sense of peace. I'm not gonna lie.
Oh,
Can you
good.
please tell me about the poem Fear the Beasts No More?
One of the things, my master's degree is in women's studies, so I've done in-depth research and study and understanding just how we're socialized to be little girls. We're socialized to be who we become. And Fear the Beast No More was a culmination of a time in my life where um, during my younger days, I felt more childlike. I felt so childlike, um, and the way society treats women in a childlike manner, and that there's so many things set up, constructed into institutions and relationships that impact how we feel about ourselves as women. And a lot of those traditions infantize women. And so to me, that Fear the Beast No More is we know their game. We know this is a construction, and we're not those little girls that they want us to be. And that our voice, we have just as much right, and our voices are just as powerful, and we have just as much to offer, and we have no fear that we are made in the image of God, and we're to show that and to let our light shine.
Thank you for saying that. I don't think I've heard a lot of people talking about how the system is infantizing women. Can you please elaborate more on that? And can you tell me which situations or how is it normalized that women are infantized without us even realizing?
One of the things that I found is the fact that when a doctor wanted to give my 5-year old son a shot, it took 4 adults to hold him down. And one of the things that we are taught as women is the worst thing we can do is get dirty or make him be messy.
Mm-hmm.
And thankfully, this is changing. And I was raised in the 60s, and that was a world ago. So thankfully, things are changing. But um, when a man attacks a woman, I realize that if a 5-year old can at least leave damage that they were there with 4 adults trying to hold them down, then we as women have it in us to go against an attacker and to what I call leave DNA evidence, at least, because we're socialized to comply. And we're so socialized that, oh, don't get messy, that we don't even want to fight for our own life. And I lived alone for about 20 years. And I know there was a time when my door blew open. And my first reaction was to shrink back in my bed. And I thought, no, go forward and get them off guard. So it's things, and of course, I suggest women take self-defense classes and be prepared for things. But that's just, and the other thing is man speak
Mm-hmm.
things. Women will say something and it doesn't get noticed until a man repeats the thing that the woman said.
Mm-hmm.
Woman will start saying something and the man will jump in, and what she's trying to say is, and one of the things that I came across was I was at a meeting and it was all professionals, every principals, um, and we were talking about gender, as a matter of fact. And one of the women made a comment, And her male colleague next to her patted her and said, "You did such a good job," for commenting during a business meeting. And so
Yeah.
it's those types of things.
Wow. Honestly, that was a lot to take in. And Susan, I'm going to be honest with you. When I stepped into this interview, I really thought that our conversation was going to be more about insights that children can bring home. And this is beautiful. This is a beautiful thing to teach children, especially little
Mm,
girls, to, be independent and be bold and be brave and be not afraid of being inconvenient when it's just like normal
right.
human emotions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like when men in the business world speak up and are bold, nobody bats an eye. But when
Nobody.
speak
Look
up,
at what,
suddenly we're emotional.
well, Gloria Steinem said that a man can push a button and blow up a country and nothing's said. But if a woman hangs up on you, she's a bitch.
1,000% I agree with you on that. I am so
And
glad we're
we
having that
even see this
conversation.
with this presidential race. Look at how much more Kamala Harris has to be,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of who the male counterpart would be.
Mm-hmm. A thousand
So,
percent.
yes.
Wow. I am so glad we're having this conversation. And like earlier before our interview, I was just like scrolling, right? And I saw something being pointed out that when you search on Google, men's safety equipments, all you're going to see in the search results are like helmets and, PPEs and just like gears. But
And
when you
yeah,
search, right, when you search women's safety gear, all you see are keychains and knives and, like it's a scary world
mhm,
women live in,
yes.
right?
Well, there is a saying among the feminists that a man's greatest fear is rejection by
Uh-huh.
a woman's greatest fear is death.
Wow. We can talk about just that one line for hours, Susan. But I want to talk about you right now.
Okay.
Oh my God, Susan, please. I think this generation and just Gen Alpha and all the generations to come, I am actually really excited that women are starting to set boundaries and be bold about it and be very
Yes.
firm, no matter what other people say. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I'm so
Well,
glad that you're.
and setting goals and prioritizing your goals
Uh-huh.
and cooperating with your loved ones. There's compromise, things that need to be done, but make sure that we're not devalued. And I think the most important thing is to value women's work, to
Mm-hmm.
value the nurturing aspects of women, to value child rearing, to value those things in a compensative way and not to be looked down upon.
Wow. Wow. All I can say is wow. Um, going back to your poetry, because I don't want to that conversation about women, we can talk about it for
Yeah,
hours, but about
we'll do
your,
another one.
yeah, yeah, I'm excited for that. But about your poetry, do you think it's harder to write poetry or writing a story from a child's perspective or a story for children?
um, with the poetry, with the research that I've done, the poetry actually comes from um, it's actually a seizure in the creative lobe, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
It's complex, but um, for the poetry, when I sit down to write a poem, it just comes out, and then I'll go back and edit it. But that's why I feel like it's so organic. And what actually happens when I write, when I sit down to write and get in that zone, is like I said before, my stomach would just be hard as a rock.
Mm-hmm.
And as I write, I feel a sensation come up and out through my throat. and I call it the squirming frogs. It's a weird feeling, but the Indian culture has a name for it with poets, and that it comes from the core rather than the brain. And so when I write my poetry, it usually I'll write marathon, just write, and then not write for a while, and then write a, a bunch. And with Augie too, it's like when I sat down to write it, it all comes out, and then I go back and edit it. Um, right now I'm working on a mystical novel also, and that is probably the most laborious in keeping everything cohesive and the characters pure to who they are and consistent with other behaviors they had and all that. Um, probably, I don't know. I just find so much joy in the whole process. For me, it's my thing. So the challenges of it just means that I have to push myself a little bit and get out of my comfort zone. So that's but it's such a joyful process, and it is work. That's the one thing that a lot of writers get, that people just think you just sit down and write. But what I tell my students is 90% of writing is in your head before you even sit
Mm,
down. That if you're researching, you read it, you twirl it around in your head, you take your notes, you do all that, and then about 10% of it is actually the sitting down and writing of it. And that's the way I feel about my writing, is I'm gathering different ideas and different things, um, as I go through life, and then all of a sudden it gets to the point where it's time to do this, and then
mm,
and it's funny. I don't know if you've heard of the book Frederick the Mouse.
no.
My daughter gave this book to me, and she told me that I am Fit Frederick. And it shows all the mice getting ready for the winter, and all the other mice are working and murmuring because Frederick's out getting the pink from the flowers and the green from the leaves, and the other mice are like, "What's he doing? We can't eat that stuff." And so the time comes that they go into the little hole in the wall where they spend the winter, and it gets to be depressing, and the food stores are getting lower, people are getting tense, everybody's fighting, and all of a sudden Frederick the Mouse jumps up on the rock and starts spewing his poetry about the spring flowers that are to come, and that there'll be more than enough food to eat, and how times have been in the past and been good, and they're going to be better now. And so that's what a poet does.
Beautifully said. Um,
Gathering the wood, but we'll keep smiling during the winter.
um, I in your book, I think you write a lot about acceptance,
Yeah,
diversity. Why do you think it's important to children, important for children to learn about diversity and acceptance at such a young age?
at such a young age, because they start that way. They start out being open and accepting.
Mm-hmm.
And sadly, at a very young age, that starts, as society has its influence, it starts to stop. Well, one of the things that I do with my students is called a purpose inventory. And it's 18 questions. And you go through a process and you end up with what your purpose inventory reveals. And mine is acceptance, which is interesting. And then through a process, you end up with 5 to 7 sentences that support your purpose. So you write that into a paragraph. And over the years, I've condensed mine into a sentence. And this will answer your question. My purpose inventory reveals acceptance, and that the expression that acceptance leads to harmony will be my legacy.
Wow. What a
And
poet you are.
well, I take that as a compliment, but that's what it's all about. And I know once I it dawned on me, I got to thinking all my writing is about, that's the moral of the story, is that acceptance will lead to harmony. And
Mm.
you asked the question about Augie, if he could explain to the dragons, other dragons, why being unique is so important, and diversity. And that's one of the things that Augie and Grandma Sue's friendship exemplifies, is neither one of them is paying each other to do what they do for each other. That it's mutual respect and valuing the person, not what they have. And so Augie's value in the story is he didn't even know he was doing it, and he did something very good. And Grandma Sue was so appreciative. And I think of people who are down on their luck, or going through hard times, or just that we have things other than money to offer. That if someone needs a place to stay, there's things they can do around the house to help, that make life easier, that will take the place of money, if that's, you know, that in other words, it's to look at ourselves as more than the things that we have, and that we have to offer more than just what society tells us, that
Mm.
that we all have different strengths. And even Augie, all he was doing was breathing normally, and that was a benefit for someone else because his breath was warm. And that's what I want kids to see. And that if we were all the same, we wouldn't get anything done, because you have to have someone. For me, it's writing and poetry, and that's the gift that I have to offer. And for another person, but if you had keys that were all the same, you could only unlock one door. But if the keys are all different, they open up different doors.
Mhm.
And
Wow. I thank you for saying that. I think you said it so beautifully. And, in today's, fast-paced society where we're
hmm
told that we have to be, very successful, part of the
right.
1%, or just having a lot of money or trophies, especially for young children in social media, they feel a lot of
hmm
pressure. And you said it so beautifully that, when Augie was breathing, it was beneficial to somebody else and he didn't even
Yeah,
realize it. And we can just be ourselves and we don't even realize that we're helping other people
that
by
we're
just being
helping.
unique.
And we can look at other people and be appreciative of
Mm-hmm.
what they have to offer, and just give people a chance to show what they have to offer too.
Mm-hmm. Going back to the purpose inventory, for the sake of the
Uh-huh.
viewers that are not familiar with it, what is the
Yes.
process like, and how do you come up with your one sentence that drives your life?
What you do is there's I'll give you the first question. The first question is, when do you feel most alive? And
Hmm.
so when do you feel most alive, Monica?
I
When would you say?
honestly, I feel most alive when I connect with other people on a deeper level.
On a deeper, so
Yeah.
why do you feel most alive when you're connecting on a deep level?
When I feel the most human, that's when I feel the most alive. And I think that can be achieved through vulnerability with other people and connecting with them on a deeper level.
So why is that important to connect with people on such a deep level and understanding?
I would imagine, as cliche as it may sound, if I'm on my deathbed, I think that's all that really matters, my connection with other people.
Okay. Out of all that, what we would save is your last response. On my deathbed, I think the most important thing would be the connections I've had with other people. So you
Thank
just
you.
that one, you save that one. So there's 18 of these questions where it's
Mm,
deep, and you save that last one. So then you have 18. And there's two ways of doing it. You can actually cut them out and make piles, or you can put them on the computer screen and type them in different colored fonts as you categorize them. So take the first one and you read it and you put it down, and then you pick up your second answer and you decide, does it go with that one or is it different? And so if it goes with it, you put it in that file or you put it under the same font on your computer. If it's not, if it's different, then you add another category or and you add another colored font. Then you go to the next one and read it and go through the same process. Is it the same as one of the others or is it different? And then usually people end up with 5 to 7 sentences. Okay, so now you have your piles, right? So you ended up with 5 to 7 piles, let's say right now, or you have 5 to 7 categories on your computer. So then what you're going to do is you're going to, out of each category, you're going to read them, and whichever one stands out, you keep, and the others go away. And you do that through all your piles. And if one pile only has one answer, then you save that. And so now you've gone from having 5 to 7 piles to having 5 to 7 sentences. And during the process, and yours may well be connection,
mm.
what because that's what your main focus is. But as you're answering the questions, and what I can do is I can send you a copy of the questions.
Please, please.
I'm going to tell you, I joke with people. I teach high school kids, and so I tell them I'm giving you your next dating app. Because if you sit through and listen, if you take turns answering these questions with someone you think you're close to, you're going to find out things about them. I had one student tell me by doing this process, she found out her husband was a lot deeper than she ever thought he was, and she knows she picked the right man.
Wow.
And then my parents were married 58 years before my father passed. And right before, like, they'd been married for like 56 years, and I did theirs. And they looked at each other on one question, and they said, I never knew that about you.
Wow.
So it's such a powerful way to really get to know somebody, and I used it as a motivating tool too when I worked at Goodwill working with clients, getting them out in the workforce. And I would do this, and my boss thought I was crazy because it could take 2 hours to answer all these questions. And he's like, you have the longest intakes ever. I said, yeah. He says, but you also get good results, so I'm not going to complain. But I learned, and I had a man, and we worked with former felons at times, and I had a man who had quite a prison record, and he had gone out, he had 5 kids, and his wife told him he could either be a gangster or a husband and father. He can't be both. And he chose to be a husband and father. And so I did this with him. And when he felt most alive was when he saw his 2-year-old daughter. So then the next question is why? And he says she's beautiful. And so I'm thinking all 2-year-olds are beautiful. Of course you're good. Know the next why it was important? He says, because when I look at her, I know I have another chance to do it right. So I knew from that point on, whenever he was having a bad day, I just had to shake that little, inspire him with his thought. How do you want this to turn out? You want you. So it's very revealing, but it's not intrusive. Uh,
Mm.
it's not intrusive, the process. And like I said, you learn a lot about yourself and the other person. So I will send you the questions.
Please. Do you have the questions published anywhere?
You know what? I'm working on my website and I'm gonna put them on my website.
If
But
you take any suggestions, I would really love it to be a card game, like just separate cards with different questions where people can play it with
yeah,
each
well, you
other,
you know what
right?
you could do? You could do that. Have friends over
Yeah.
and make little index cards with the questions and have them answer the layers because that's where you really get to it. And just or with somebody just every once in a while ask them a question where it's not sitting down, you have to answer this. But yeah, it would be a great friend group game kind of thing or activity. Everybody can just have a
Yeah.
partner and be answering the questions, and or you can go around and get everybody's answer and go from there. But definitely, and it would fit right with your whole connection thing. That's why you're so excited about it.
You got me. I am excited about
No,
it.
no, I'm happy because I love the results I get with my students doing this, and they're always like, because there's some amazing um, little paragraphs they come up with. These are 15, 16-year-old kids, and there's hope for the future because most of them are very empathetic, compassionate, and loyal. They have a lot of very good qualities, the young people, and yeah.
You're changing so many lives, Susan. I hope you recognize that, and I'm excited to get into the questions, and you better expect a long email from me.
Well, I'm telling you, if you want to on our own time, we can go through it. I'd be
You're
happy to
so
do that.
sweet.
No, I'd be happy to do it. I'd be
Thank
happy to.
you. Thank you. But I'm sure our viewers are getting such a treat getting like a one-on-one coaching session right now with you. Yeah. Um, so looking back at your journey, what message or what advice would you give to the Susan that was just starting out?
Wait, with the writing part
Hmm. Yeah, or anything.
of anything, well, with the writing, I would definitely tell myself that this is a business and you need to have some resources behind you to be
Mm,
able to do the marketing and to do the things that are necessary that the publishers and filmmakers are looking for is that you do have to be able or have people willing to invest in
mhm.
the marketing aspect of your book.
That is a very practical advice. And as
Yes.
someone who has her passion turn into a business or a full-time job, how do you
Uh-huh.
keep yourself from burning out?
Right now, I'm I think right now I'm teaching and working on this. I think right now I'm at a point of kind of disbelief that it's all happening, that all of this is coming true. And but the things that I'm doing and as my book publishing grows and all those kind of things grow, um the students that I have mentored since they were in high school are brilliant. I have three girls One of them she's married and just had a baby, but she's already graduated with her bachelor's degree and she'll be working on her master's, and she's 22. She's
Wow.
very young. I mean, she's accomplished so much. Um, and then her sister is the one that does she's an English major, so she does all my proofreading and editing, and
Mhm.
she is my go-to girl. And then I have another student that is building the website, and she's a tech genius, and she's so organized. These girls are so organized. They keep me organized. And I think that's what keeps me going is I'm working with these young women that I've mentored and that mean so much to me, and they're able to grow with it. And then I get to be with them,
Mm.
hate with them, and they keep me young, and it's joyful. And I think I'm glad this is happening at the point that it's happening, that I'm older and grounded and can do good things with the things that are coming for me.
What I'm getting is probably the key to not getting burnt out is constant growth and
Hmm.
curiosity and
Yeah.
I guess connection with
Connection with,
different people.
yeah, with different people, and understanding the assets that you have around you.
Hmm.
You know, like these young girls, this is a perfect time for them because they're starting on their careers, and to have these things on their resume. When they applied for their bachelor's program, one of the girls they'd already done the proofreading and editing for three of my books. And one of the girls, she got a 5 in AP Spanish. So she's like brilliant. She can write at any level.
Wow.
And I have Augie translated into Spanish. And so
Wow.
that will be coming in the future. Augie and Core-Uption in Spanish. And so it's good for these young women for their careers to get this boost. And
Hmm.
they were part of what happened the first semester I taught at Victor High School. These kids are taking college classes. And about midway through the semester, one of the girls raised her hand and asked if I would help them transition to the university. And so they thought we would meet for an hour to talk about scholarships. And I told them, I said, you got to build your resume. I said,
Mm.
there's all kinds of kids out there. These kids have 4.6s. I mean, it's crazy the GPAs these kids carry because they're taking college classes in high school. So their
Wow.
GPA isn't enough. I said, you need something that's going to show volunteering in the community. So we started this group, Tomorrow's Leaders, and they started off. There's a women's club and Rockin' Our Disabilities, which is they work with families with children with disabilities, and a couple of other um, events that go on. And so what we would do with these kids, and it fluctuated. There were four that were constant, but there would be others that would come to help on events. So they would go and volunteer in the community, like at the Toys for Tots, wrapping presents, doing things like that. And then a friend of mine created an authentic mercado up here for the Spanish community, where with vendors and music and really a festive atmosphere for Saturday and Sunday. So the kids learned how to make the raspados, the fresh fruit. They made them organic, fresh fruit, everything. So they made these raspados and popcorn and snow cones and sold them at this Rispado or at this Mercado for my friend. And so they made all these connections in the community. And when they went to apply for one of them ended up at UCR, University of Riverside, and the other one ended up at San Diego State. And both of those schools said that what stood out was the Tomorrow's Leaders because it was all done it was intrinsic. It was
Mm.
altruistic. They weren't getting anything back, but they ended up getting a lot back because they ended up with scholarships. They ended up One of the students ended up with the Dell Scholarship, $10,000, and she ended up graduating Student of Excellence at San Diego State. So
Wow.
yeah, that these girls are just amazing. And so I feel so blessed that I have my best friend who's an educator. She's going to be doing lesson plans for Augie and make it into something the schools can use. And then
Wow.
I have this whole team we've just been waiting for the time. And now the time is here. And so that's my
Wow.
joy. I'm really excited about, and I'm an excellent delegator.
Oh, yeah,
After
I can tell.
raising four kids, I can delegate. That's what
Wow.
my honey tells me I should. I actually have business cards that say Susan Christensen CD, chief delegator. So I'll be writing and they'll be doing all the stuff.
Yeah. Wow. And that's a wonderful way of also empowering women by
Yeah,
delegating and
yeah,
mentoring.
and it's entrusting. To me, I
Mm,
feel that if I think I'm the only one that can do it, that's awfully arrogant of me to think no one else could do this but me. You know what I'm saying? That to me, it's like it's entrusting someone. It's showing you believe in them
yeah.
that they can handle it. And
Yeah.
it's
It
worked so
ties
far.
in. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I can't see why it wouldn't work. It also ties in with the messages in all of your books about uniqueness and ability and
yeah,
empowerment and diversity. And
yeah. And embracing the diversity.
yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for all the work you do, Susan.
Well,
That's
it's
such a light.
joy. It truly is joy. It's joy.
And you're such a joy. And well, Susan, I have prepared a segment for us. So I want to really get to know your characters or
Uh-huh.
just your thought process. So I
Okay.
have a segment like, what would blank, like your character, do? So I want to start with Augie. What would Augie do? So Augie is trying to convince the kids that they're all unique. What
Hmm.
are the fun strategies he would use to convey that message to the children?
Well, one of the things, and we talked about this a little bit. Well, one of the things would be a puzzle,
Mhm,
right? Even if the puzzle pieces are the same color, they're a different shape. So none of them are the same at all. But together, we get this beautiful picture. And what happens if you're missing one piece to the puzzle? Do you still frame it and keep it? Most likely not. It's
mhm,
only valuable if all the pieces are there. So if one's missing, then the whole purpose is lost. And we can look at that with people too, that if one of us is missing, then the whole is is lacking,
mhm.
and that we only get value when we all come together.
Mhm. That's
And
connection.
connection, yes, expressing acceptance.
It's all tying
All
together.
coming together, yes.
Yeah. So the second scenario would be about what would Josh do? So imagine Josh came upon a magical creature where it grants wishes, but it only does that when he shares the wishes with his friends. What do you think Josh would wish for?
For Joshi, I would want to think of something that a teenage boy would wish for that might cause him problems if it comes true. And so the thing I thought he would want him and his friends to be able to do is to have clones to do all their chores, to go to church if they want to sleep in on Sunday, do those kind of things. And so what I thought might be a twist is one day the family's leaving for church and Joshy wanted to sleep in, so he sent the clone and dad comes back in without Joshy knowing he forgot his keys or something and he sees Joshy in the bed, but Joshy's in the car too. So that could be a whole scenario.
That's
How
a
to,
smart one.
how to explain how Joshy's two places at once.
That's a smart one, honestly. If that was possible, I think a lot of kids would do that.
Yeah, yes,
Um,
that's what I thought of.
the last question I have for you is what would Sue do? So imagine Josh would summon you to the story of Core-Uption. How would Susan bring the kids back home?
Being unfamiliar with the territory, I think I would have to rely on the friendly Potahs the way the kids ended up.
Mm.
Once the scientists found the potato in Joshy's backpack and they knew they were potato eaters, they were in danger. So the friendly two of the Potahs assist them. So I think I would have to rely on the Potahs because I would be unfamiliar and we're in a sinkhole, so there's, no way out that way. So I would just hope to find a friendly Potah.
That would be quite an adventure. Now,
Yeah.
Susan, before we wrap up, how can our viewers find more information about your books or just about you?
Right now, the books are on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and you can order them from Walmart too. And I am currently one of my students is building the website. So as soon as that is up, it's going to be augieslair.com and it should be up within the next month or so. And we'll be featuring, I will post the purpose inventory questions on the website. And I will also be featuring there's other writers at the college that have written children's books, so I'll be featuring their books on the website also. So there'll be a variety to choose from.
I am genuinely looking forward to them, and I am so excited for everything that you have coming, Susan. Thank you so much for the work
Yeah,
that you do for little girls or even little boys. Thank you for fighting the good fight for women and raising the next generation and mentoring and empowering women. I just want to really genuinely thank you for doing that. And with that being said, thank you so much, Susan, for spending your time with me and for inspiring me. And I'm sure you're inspiring a lot of our viewers right now. And I'm sure they're rushing into your website and finding the inventory questions.
well,
And
hopefully when it's up, it'll take us a little bit, but they'll be there.
so, with that being said, that was Professor Sue C. Everybody, thank you all for tuning in. Again, don't forget to share, like, subscribe for more stories, inspiring stories like Susan's. And until next time, don't be afraid
Yes,
of being human. You're not inconvenient. So just live your magic. Thank you so much again, Susan. I can't
and
wait to
thank
talk
you,
to you again.
Monica. Yes, I would love to talk to you again.
Yeah.